Good day to everyone and welcome back to the IVSA Kelantan podcast show. For our fifth episode today, we'll be talking about forensic veterinary medicine in paleontology with our guest speaker, Professor Dr. Ibrahim Abdul-azeez. Dr. Ibrahim obtained his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree from the University of Maiduguri in Nigeria, where he graduated par excellence. He was also awarded as the best graduating student in 2005. He later rejoined University of Maiduguri as an assistant lecturer in September 2006. Dr. Ibrahim also obtained his doctorate in veterinary forensic pathology from University Putra Malaysia UPM in 2011. In 2014, the University of Maiduguri appointed Dr. Ibrahim as the liaison of the intellect to Malaysia, within which he is serving as an academic staff in the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, University Malaysia Kelantan. Here, he is also an associate professor and the university's regional representative for Africa. Dr. Ibrahim is interested in veterinary-related discussions and futuristic learning. He is currently married with 3 children. Hello, doctor, and welcome.
I'm very excited to be with IVSA. In fact, as part of the introduction, I was actually the pioneer secretary of IVSA in University of Maiduguri in 2004. That was when we established it in my university. So we were the pioneer. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's interesting, doctor. Okay, so to continue with this session, in basic terms, paleontology is the study of fossils to classify organisms and their interactions with each other and their environments. Bearing that in mind, let's ask Doctor to take us through some questions we have regarding this topic. Can I pass to my teammate Jaya?
All right. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm good. Okay, so we will start off with some light questions, okay?
All right.
All right, for the first questions, what is veterinary forensic medicine and how does it relate to paleontology?
All right. Thank you very much, Jaya, for inviting me. It's an honor to be part of this IVSA program. I think the program is quite interesting, and the topics you guys are sharing is informative and also educative. So it goes away from the didactic learning process you guys always go through in class to something much broader in veterinary perspective, so which is good. Kudos to you all. So coming back to your question, you want me to relate veterinary forensic pathology with paleontology. So as you all know, paleontology is about studying fossils, which is basically a study that helps in understanding the evolutionary stages that occurs in the life of animals from prehistoric ages onto our current state of species. So from the old dinosaur age until the Homo sapiens species, as well as the diversifications that we have. So paleontology helps us in understanding where this got broken apart or fused together, where each species became differentiated across history, and where they do they come together in the historical perspective. So that gives us a broader view on what kind of animals we're dealing with, and gives us an understanding of our genetic profiling and differences. So having said that, when you come to forensic veterinary medicine, it's a bit similar and a bit different. While paleontology studies fossils to understand, basically you could say to understand evolutionary phases of life, forensic veterinary medicine is basically dealing with the courts of law. You're supposed to use evidences from your knowledge of veterinary medicine, all branches of veterinary medicine, including veterinary pathology, veterinary physiology, veterinary biochemistry, veterinary clinical pathology, whatever you've learned in veterinary medicine, we use it to substantiate evidences in the courts of law. So meaning that whenever there is a case that is associated with injuries to animals, suspected animal abuse, cruelty, so we try to create evidence from the knowledges we've gained of the animal to present in the court in a way that the judges or the jury will be able to understand and also prosecute the criminal that we have in mind, maybe the suspect that we think might be responsible for that act of criminality. So it is similar because in paleontology, you're using fossils to try to recreate history, to understand history. But in forensic medicine, you're using evidences, whether in live animal or dead animal, to create evidence. So that's the difference. In paleontology, you're creating history, while in forensic medicine, you're creating evidence that is admissible in the courts of law. So that's the basic similarity and the basic difference in both forensic medicine and paleontology. Have I answered your question? Is that okay?
Yes, doctor. That was a very clear explanation on it.
All right, thank you.
All right. Okay. So we'll move on to the next question. Since veterinarians, they routinely diagnose and treat animals, right? So how is forensic veterinary medicine different from these routines when it comes to paleontology?
All right. So your question was that we veterinarians normally diagnose diseases in animals, and based on our daily routine activities, how is it different from veterinarians in paleontology? Okay, the basic difference is that while you're talking about fossils, it's basically things that have been hidden from us, things that we have no idea existed, and we go searching for it. So in veterinary practice, what we have is that usually we have the live animals in our clinics or in our hospitals that we try to diagnose. So they come up with clinical signs that we piece up together as pieces of puzzles to understand what's wrong with that animal. So we also use some tests to try to determine the cause of the condition of the animal. However, in contrast to paleontology, we basically are studying, in most cases, bones. We're studying, in most cases, bones of fossilized animals, meaning that these animals have been dead millions or billions of years ago. So we're trying to use those evidences to reconstruct the kind of life they have lived with the environment in a social group or individually. So it's a bit different because while you're dealing with live animals in our routine practices as veterinary doctors, for paleontology, you're actually dealing with dead prehistoric animals. So which you will have to have a very deep understanding of the differences in species for you to be able to reconstruct or to remodel what the animal is supposed to look like. Either hypothetically or theoretically, you should be able to recreate a closely perfect image of that animal. So in veterinary practice, our understanding of the normals of the animals we treat helps us in actually piecing together those fossils that we figure out when we go for paleontology. So, but the major difference between these two is that you will need to get dirty when you're dealing with paleontology. You will need some sense of archaeology. So both of them, yes, you will need to get dirty. In live animals, you have to handle the feces, the urine, and everything. But in the dead animal, you have to handle the dust, the shaving, the cleaning, and everything for you to be able to pick up those bones. So those bones are actually evidences or information that you will extract based on the changes that have occurred over time in those bones or in those fossilized materials that you found. So our knowledge of veterinary medicine actually helps us in understanding what has happened to that animal over time. Thank you. I hope you're clear with that. It's a bit lengthy.
Yeah, we're clear with that, doctor. We're clear with
Thank you.
Okay. For the next question, what do you think is the best discovery in this field so far, and how has it affected the veterinary field?
Thank you very much for that question. If I may repeat your question, it is that what is the best discovery so far in paleontology that has affected the veterinary profession? I think so far so good. In my perspective, in the daily routines of veterinary practice, there is no much input from paleontology in the way we practice veterinary medicine. You will agree that no veterinarian will think about what killed a dinosaur in order to relate it to what's going on with the birds we have here, with the poultry birds, or with the wolves, or with the dogs that we treat. Nobody thinks about that. However, it is important for us to know that there are a few points in time, especially I think if you're following the trends in paleontology, 2017 was the best year so far. 2017, that's 5 years ago, is the best year so far for paleontology. Why? Because they were able to discover the oldest living colony of bacteria. So that, for me, interests me a lot. Meaning that they're called stromatolites. So these stromatolites were preserved well enough in a place called Greenland for us to understand the evolutionary perspective of animal species that we have now. So meaning that if they're able to study it, we can actually understand how diversified we are from that single cell organism over time. How far have we deviated from that original bacteria? How close are we with it? I think for me, that's the best discovery so far that happened in 2017. Secondly, in ranking, I'm also interested in the Harascaraptor. There is a duck-like dinosaur called the Harascaraptor, which it's very similar to a duck, very similar. So if you look into the history of that, it's interesting, meaning that when you see the ducks we have, you will be able to piece together the behavioral characteristics of these ducks and see how they've changed from that original fossilized duck dinosaur that we have. Then the third one, which is actually, I want to believe that is the most interesting, is the identification or the finding of a complete hominoid, meaning that a standing ape fossil in Ethiopia. That it was found, I think, in about 1974. So it's called Lucy. You should Google it out. So you would say that it's well fossilized, well preserved. If you get into a museum in Ethiopia now, you will find it. So that shows you that, yes, the evolutionary tree is actually realistic. So whatever dimension of thoughts you might have about evolution, yes, it explains a lot on how to understand where we've come from and where we're possibly going to. So that's the explanation we have. I hope I did answer you.
All right. Thank you, Doctor.
All right. Thank you.
And the last question for me is, how can a forensic veterinarian who works in paleontology, he or she contribute to the veterinary field?
All right. Your question is, how will the veterinarian currently working with the paleontology field or in the paleontology field assist in making some input in the field of veterinary medicine? The way you could do that is by, number one, you will need to have a very firm basic understanding of veterinary medicine. It has to be very firm. You will need to know the diversification among species. You will need to know the different diseases that affect these various species of animals that we handle, from wild to domestic to semi-domestic animals. And you will also need to understand, apart from infectious diseases or metabolic condition, you also need to understand the hereditary or congenital conditions that when you're working with fossils, you should be able to, at the tip of a finger, identify that this is not normal. This is not normal. For example, if you find a fossil of a fossilized bone of a dinosaur, for example, a T-Rex, that is broken, you should have that knowledge to know that this is possibly a fracture. And not just a fracture, the type of fracture will tell you what kind of force was used to break that bone. Is it a crushing force? Is it a biting force? Is it what's it called, a hairline fracture? So what is it? So your understanding of the basics of veterinary medicine will help us understand what went on then. So while this understanding is good enough for veterinarians practicing paleontology, most importantly, it's in the area of emerging and re-emerging diseases. So if we are able to piece together what were the kind of diseases that affected fossilized animals, prehistoric animals, we might be able to find out, for example, you all know about transmissible venereal tumor that was actually found in Tasmanian at devils. So it's a very long history. It has a very long history with different animals over time. It's still here with us, and we are unable to identify how to either prevent it. Yeah, cure, yes, we can cure it, but prevention is still we were still wanting in that. So veterinarians can actually figure out how to use the evidence from fossils, from history, to prevent what's going to happen in the future, or what is going on now. Also, talk about tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is a very old disease, very old infectious disease that you will be surprised how old it is still today. We are yet to figure out how to completely control it. So it's been there for long, and we're unable to control it. So veterinarians that are into paleontology can actually come up with basically using molecular techniques to find out how this tuberculosis or how this diseases or infectious agents have changed over time. What regions in their genetic makeup were preserved? That's why I told you that the first stromatolite that was discovered is quite interesting. So we wanted to know in that bacteria, how similar is it to those infectious diseases we have now? Where have they gone apart? So the information we get from there, how can we use them to develop vaccines against the current infectious disease we have? How has that evolved into viruses, into protozoa? How have they done that? So actually, it is interesting, although it is not a field that veterinarians do go to often, paleontology, because it doesn't give the bucks, it doesn't give money. But for academic purpose, it's an interesting field veterinarians can get into to help in preventing emerging, re-emerging, and transboundary diseases from getting information from prehistoric animals. Thank you very much. I hope that's good enough for you.
Yes, doctor, that was very clear for me.
All
and
right.
For the remaining questions, I'll pass on to my teammate Ashley.
All right, Ash.
Okay.
Okay. Doctor, you mentioned earlier that forensic medicine can actually help us reconstruct events that have happened in the past. So could you take us through this process just briefly?
Yeah, for forensic medicine, basically the way we reconstruct is a bit advanced now. When we try to reconstruct, number one, you have to investigate the scene. After you get the history, you receive a complaint from the client, maybe a complaint of animal abuse that may have resulted into death or into substantial injury to the animal. So you have to visit the scene. You visit the scene and then investigate. That's where the veterinary CSI comes in. So CSI, that's a crime scene investigation. So you need to investigate the time, the place, the condition, the scenario around there, try to figure out where there is evidence, food tracks, everything, whatever you can. So, but most importantly, you shouldn't disturb the scene, the crime scene. You should not disturb the crime scene. You should need to cordon the area and take pictures. That's quite important. You have to be trained in the art of taking pictures and taking evidences. So I need to mention here that the picture taking is actually the most important in that crime scene investigation, because you could return that picture through a software. Usually they call it a tri-top software to reconstruct that area, that event, to reconstruct the animal, to reconstruct the timing and everything, and actually form a timeline through what has happened in that scene. So aside that, you could also, when you come to the animal itself, investigating the forensic evidences on the animal victim, apart from photogrammetry, you also use what we call multi-slice computerized tomography. So meaning that the CT will take images slice by slices over time, different slices of the body, and these slices will now be converted through an algorithm into 3D imaging. So which you can actually peel off layer over layer over layer of the animal. So it helps us in understanding the depth of injury, the type of injury, the type of material, the strength of impact, the direction of impact. All of that is actually important. I'll give you an example. The first reported evidence using that was in, I think, 2007 in Bern, Switzerland. So that happened when there is a species of cat called the lynx that's been banned from hunting in Switzerland. So someone shot a lynx and then claimed that he did not do it. So they had to reconstruct that, do an MSCT. After they call it 3D photogrammetry, have a 3D photogrammetry, then do an MSCT to identify the type, the shape, and the dimension of the bullet that was used. And they got the registration number and traced it back to the owner of the gun in Switzerland. So that actually helps in reconstructing everything. Most importantly, you're not just going there to gather the evidence. You're going there to gather the evidence for you to be able to link it to someone that is a suspect in that crime. So when the evidence for that lynx case was gathered, it was linked to the person that purchased that gun and then the bullet. So the case was solved in the classical CSI manner. So that's how you go through reconstructing evidence using imaging, using software to construct the three-dimensional or even four-dimensional imaging. So when you go to paleontology, it's about the same thing. It's about the same thing, but most importantly in paleontology is that you will need to date it. You will need to form a time tree. You will need to form, determine exactly when in history did that occur. So that's the difference. In forensics, you're dealing with maybe a short period of time, and then you're able to figure out who the suspect is. But in paleontology, you need to reconstruct it so that with the X-ray diffraction analysis, you'll be able to determine how long this fossil has been there, fossilized in the soil or in the water or wherever it is, or in the ice. You'll be able to picture that out. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does, Doctor. Aside from the normal forensic procedures, there's the additional factor of dating in the fossils, right, Doctor?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
So how does reconstruction of these events help us in understanding current animal issues, and can we make inferences about modern animal behaviors based on the events that we have constructed from fossils?
From fossils, what your question is, what from our understanding of fossilized animal materials, how can we relate it to the current animal behaviors or what we understand about animals now? So what we know is that most behaviors of animals, as they, for example, their social behavior, we've been able to trace them back to prehistoric ages. For example, most hunting animals, they hunt in groups. And then, for example, you all remember the T-Rex, quite intelligent. And then it's some of those genetic materials, some of those characteristics have been passed down across generations towards the carnivorous animals that we still have today. So, for example, the wolves, they still hunt in pack. The lions, they still hunt in pack. So the same characteristic we do have in those prehistoric ages are still there in these animals, conserved in some of the traits they have. So it has given us an understanding on how these animals behave. Apart from behavior, it also gave us understanding on what has been the changes in the morphometry of these animals over time. Definitely, you have not many animals that look like T-Rex now. No, not many animals look like that. And definitely, you don't have dragons, definitely. So, however, there are animals that have the characteristics, the traits of those T-Rex or raptors that are still there. So, using those fossilized information or data, we can now construct to see how different these animals have gone, how far away from the origin have they been. So with that, it helps us understand the current behavior they are. And with the current behavior that these animals have, we can actually predict or hypothesize what was the behavior of the prehistoric animals as well. So it's a two-way bridge. So one goes into the future and the other goes into the past. So the animals we have now gives us information about the past, how their ancestors behaved. And then the fossils we have will now give us information about how these animals behave now. You get that? And then also, when you talk about the bones we've seen, we also see that the type of injuries that have been affecting the fossilized materials over time, they're quite consistent to this day. For example, osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis has been there for a long time. It's still there now. So maybe we have evidence from those prehistoric ages to understand the progression or the genetic makeup of some of the arthritis cases that has been bedeviling us or has been of a challenge to us. So we can use information from there to figure out how to handle this osteoarthritis that we do have now. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does, Doctor. And I have one last question. I think it relates a little bit to the previous question. So,
All right.
as we all know, phylogenetic trees play a large part in our fields, especially in terms of understanding evolutionary relationships between different organisms. So, how does forensic veterinary medicine aid in constructing a phylogenetic tree based on the information that we can gather from fossils?
Actually, as I said earlier, forensic veterinary medicine will not necessarily generate a phylogenetic tree for fossilized animals. The phylogenetic tree is basically for paleontologists. Forensics will deal with the courts of law. I hope you get that. We will deal with the courts of law, providing evidence to that court for us to be able to prosecute a suspect. So if you want to develop a phylogenetic tree, so you need to go, we'll have something called the time tree. The time tree lapse, meaning that, as we've been saying earlier, we keep on mentioning it arbitrarily, meaning that at some point in time, where do these animals differ from each other genetically? So genetically, that has been expressed either phenotypically or genetically. So that expression, that differences is what we look for in the time tree lapse. So at what point in history does this feature, for example, the tail that was present in the Harascosaurus, the duck-like bird, the tail that was there, at what point in time did it go away? At what point in time? At what point in time did we lose the features of the humanoid behavior that was there before? At what point in time did we do that? So we need to find out using genetic analysis, phylogenetic analysis to reconstruct that. So the advantage of forensic veterinary medicine is that you will have a basic knowledge of how to use phylogenetic tree. So that basic knowledge of phylogenetic tree can be applied both to forensic veterinary medicine as well as paleontology. So meaning that if you're able to understand where the genetic diversity or similarity occurs, you'll be able to picture out when did something occur in prehistoric times. So that's basically the main either similarities or dissimilarities. Okay, thank you.
All right, Doctor, thank you. So I'll pass the floor to Jaya to wrap up our session tonight.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Doctor. And that is all, folks, for our 5th podcast episode. It was an interesting topic we had today, and pretty sure that most of us are really new to forensic veterinary medicine in paleontology. So, to conclude from our podcast session today, forensic veterinary medicine in paleontology has given a huge impact in veterinary field as it gives us understanding on the evolutionary relationship between among different species of organism, and it also helps to analyze all these information that we have gotten from the core. Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim, for taking the
Thank you.
time to talk.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. I hope you guys did get me, and I hope it was clear enough for you to build upon. The podcast is about you reading more when you get back. So it's to generate ideas and then help you trigger a learning process. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you,
Doctor.
Doctor.
Thank you. And as for our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in on our podcast session today. And once again, thank you so much to the whole team. Have a good day, everyone, and stay safe.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you so
guys.
much, Doctor.
All right.